Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. This important panel, which we're going to discuss keeping our communities safe for all Americans, making sure that families can live in peace, and making sure that every child can play safely in their front yard. I'm Matt Whitaker. I'm the co-chair of the Center for Law and Justice at the America First Policy Institute, working right alongside my co-chair, Pam Bondi, who I'm very proud to work with. As many of you know, prior to joining AFPI, I was the acting attorney general in the Trump administration. I've been a former U.S. attorney in a previous administration and have been at the Department of Justice over 7.5 years in total. I have been attracted to being part of AFPI for a long time, as many of you have, because when it was formed, it was a creation of a lot of people that I thought were rock stars in the Trump administration. No one bigger or better than Brooke Rollins, who is just an amazing leader of this group. And one of the most important interests, I think, for the preservation of our republic is what this center works on, which is maintaining the rule of law. And supporting the rule of law requires a commitment to many key principles, including adhering to the original intent of our founding fathers as evidenced in the Constitution, understanding our shared commitment to the rule of law and the law as written and not at the whims of unelected, nameless, faceless bureaucrats or judges in black robes, and making sure, in addition to all that, that we hold criminals accountable to the law when they violate it. Respecting and defending the rule of law necessarily touches upon several issues that are important to the America First agenda. First and foremost is supporting the men and women of law enforcement, making sure and ensuring that we have a stable and robust law enforcement community that upholds constitutional rights of our citizens, and making sure that, again, we back and support the men and women of law enforcement who stand as the bulwark against criminality and lawlessness. We must also protect our cherished Second Amendment rights and recognize that the right to keep and bear arms is essential to a free people. We must hold elected officials accountable when they refuse their responsibilities of office, whether they, through their executive leadership, support defunding the police and compromising safety of communities. We need to hold them accountable when they're social justice activists masquerading as prosecutors and refusing to seek punishment against criminals who repeatedly ravage our communities. And we also need to make sure that the rule of law stands for combating human trafficking and illegal drug trafficking. And finally, we need to keep our most vulnerable citizens in our communities and in our schools safe from violence, and so that everyone can have, like I said, a safe and stable environment to learn, to live, and to flourish. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Pam Bondi.
Why, thank you, General Whitaker. So because we're all about law and order today, I can't think of three better human beings to be on this panel with us, and I have the honor of introducing them all. Representative Mike Johnson of Louisiana. He has represented Louisiana's 4th District since 2017, and you sure have distinguished yourself as a conservative among conservatives. A true leader. He's vice chair of the Republican House Caucus and previously served as chair of the Republican Study Committee, which, if you're not familiar with it, look that up. It is the largest conservative caucus in Congress. Prior to being elected to Congress, he served in the Louisiana House of Representatives, and before that enjoyed a distinguished career as an attorney and true champion for conservative causes. And I got to know him briefly during impeachment round 1, and he is a true hero and an American patriot who is just a great man, so thank you. Our next panelist is Sheriff Bill Waybourne, who is also a friend of ours. And you've got a cheering section over there. All right. Sheriff Waybourne has over 40 years of law enforcement experience, currently serves as the elected sheriff of Tarrant County, Texas, a position that he's held since 2017. Since assuming that role, he's been on the forefront of developing the department's first human trafficking and intelligence units, drawing on his experience to modernize and enhance department operations. He's worked with Texas lawmakers to expand Texas's concealed carry and open carry handgun laws. And it's an honor for me to introduce you, Sheriff Waybourne. Thank you. Next, but far from last, is Matt and I are very close with General Eric Schmidt. Thank you for joining us, Eric. When I was Attorney General, if I needed a conservative cause, a conservative brief signed, my first call was to Eric Schmidt. Thank you for everything that you've done as Attorney General to fight for all of conservative causes. Eric has been the Chief Law Enforcement Officer in Missouri since 2019 after serving as the state treasurer. He also is the one who was able to obtain a preliminary injunction against the Biden administration over its attempt to end Title 42 that we know has been at the forefront of maintaining border security. A.G. Schmidt also served in the Missouri State Senate. And Eric, thank you for everything you've done for our conservative causes. So, thank you. Matt?
Yeah, so my first question is going to be for you, Sheriff. And, Pam said you spent 40 years in law enforcement. You've distinguished yourself. And, as the Bible says, there's nothing new under the sun. However, I'm sure in 2015, when Ferguson happened in Baltimore and now, Minneapolis, you see this movement to not only defund the police, but to recommission, redirect, to take resources away from law enforcement and put them in other community services. How has that affected the law enforcement community? I mean, as a law enforcement officer yourself, how has that impacted law enforcement? How does it affect your recruiting and retention? How are we going to make law enforcement a career that is once again? I don't think it was ever not admirable. So I don't want my questions, because I think law enforcement, I have so much respect for the minimum of law enforcement. But as a public policy consideration, how do we restore it to what kids grow up to want to be, wear the blue, and to protect their communities?
Well, first of all, thank you all. It's an incredible honor to be on this panel with you all and here today from Texas. It's a lot cooler here, by the way. Is the Ferguson effect was rolling along, and we thought we were recovering from it. And then, of course, 2020 happened and all of that business and the defund the police movement. And in Texas, our legislatures took a stand on it and outlawed it, said you can't defund the police in Texas, which was incredible. And I hope that the other states follow suit, but it still, the philosophy and the attitude has still affected every city across the country, every place, every county and state, because the difficulty of recruiting today because of those things is just incredible. Every agency that I know is down, and you look at the big agencies across the nation, like Chicago, that's 800 officers down. Dallas is 600 officers down. Over in Tarrant County Sheriff's Office, we're nearly 200 down, and they're not coming in the door. And so it had an incredible effect on recruiting and retention. People are bailing out. They're just saying, we don't need this, and they don't feel like they're back. They don't feel like the politicians are going to make sure that they're okay, that they're going to hang them instead. And so they're backing way off of that.
And Sheriff, I really feel like it's coming back around more towards law enforcement more than ever. The polling shows that, but take that out of it. I mean, the policies people care about, number one, being safe.
Absolutely.
That's what they care about, safe in their communities, and that includes respecting the men and women in blue. General Schmidt, speaking of that, we talk about a lot these rogue prosecutors. And, we've been talking about it, I think, before it was popular to talk about them. And now I think folks are seeing the impact that they're having on their communities when they're letting murderers out of jail, when they're arresting a store clerk in New York who is a victim of a crime for defending himself at his place of work. I mean, people are seeing this more and more and more, and how important it is to our country to have great elected officials at the state level. Can you, with your vast experience in law enforcement, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean,
prosecutors.
Yeah, we've seen it in St. Louis, for example. You've got a Soros-funded prosecutor. It's been a total disaster, And St. Louis has suffered, the surrounding region has suffered. It's hard to have a growing economy when people are afraid to walk from here to there. So we've experienced that in Missouri. You've got that in Kansas City as well. And I think it's emblematic of a much larger issue, which is the left's acceptance of lawlessness. You see it at the southern border. You see it with a lot of the actions that the Biden administration has taken, totally ignoring the law, knowing that they're wrong, and it's up to then the state AGs to push back and ultimately win. But you see this permeating. It's sort of a party platform now. When you had the leadership under the Trump administration, and President Trump specifically, who was unafraid to stand up and say, this is wrong. We are going to support the men and women of law enforcement. We need to make sure we're prosecuting the bad guys. And, regardless of your woke lexicon, this is the right thing to do. And so we've seen it specifically with these prosecutors in big cities like St. Louis. The numbers are a disaster. And the police officers will tell you they won't even take the cases that they're bringing to them. The warrant officers won't take the cases. You also see when those folks get into office, you have a lot of experienced prosecutors in those offices who find meaning in, prosecuting, and when the leadership at the top is telling them not to do these things, they've left en masse. You have over 100% turnover in that office. The conviction rate has plummeted. They have people who got out of law school a year ago doing a lot of their grand jury work. So it's worse than people think, because the headlines will show you the murder that's been let out. But the truth of the matter is, all these other cases are being handled by folks who are very inexperienced, or who are these sort of woke ideologues who have no, desire to really prosecute violent crimes. So I think it's very important for, America First conservatives to be out there, be unafraid to talk about these things and talk about the challenges and how we need to support law and order. We need to support the men and women of law enforcement. When these defund the police efforts start to actually hit the budgets, we got to stand up and we have to fight back. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on that, Eric. I think we've seen a movement to recall, in California especially, a couple of the prosecutors that are Soros funded. I mean, a lot of what America needs is just the people to be restored to their rightful place as the sovereign in this government, whether it's state, or local or even federal. What are the mechanisms? Each state's different. California does have a recall. What are the opportunities for the ordinary citizen to take back kind of the rule of law and have it executed by these prosecutors?
Well, I think we need to demand better, number one, right? And it's up to us as leaders, people in this room, and talking to our friends and neighbors to demand better. But you also have a situation where, every state's different. We don't actually have original jurisdiction. My office, the Attorney General's office, doesn't have original jurisdiction on state crimes. We have to be asked to come in and help. That happens a lot in rural Missouri, but not so much in the cities. And so we've had to get creative. So Missouri was the first state in the country to have our assistant AGs deputized as assistant U.S. attorneys. So we could prosecute violent crime in the big cities in St. Louis and Kansas City under federal law. And so we were, carjackings. And so I recognized very early on that the prosecutors weren't willing to do their jobs. And so we have over 800 charges to date, over 600 indictments to date. We have also taken on clearing the backlog of sexual assault kits across the state, because a lot of local prosecutors weren't, in the big cities, weren't interested in that. They're talking about normalizing human trafficking in many ways by, decriminalizing sex work is what they call it. And we know that human trafficking is a real problem. So we've taken that on. We've partnered with federal and local officials on human trafficking. And so I think a lot of this is leadership. It's finding the deficiencies of what they're doing, which are stark and have real impacts on real people. And I think that's important to point out. I had an older black woman come up to me she said, I'm tired of sweeping up glass on Sunday mornings. And so these are communities that we need to fight for. And a lot of that is just enforcing the law, prosecuting the people who are committing violent crime, partnering where we can, and making sure people have respect for the men and women who wear that uniform.
You know, and Eric, it's not just about what you said before. It's about helping everybody, not just going after the violent criminals, because often we have so many drug courts in our country now that help so many people. And if we don't have the right law enforcement officers out there and the right AGs and the right prosecutors to help these people, to put them in diversion courts so they can get the help they need, our country's really lacking there in that respect too. So it's across the board.
Well, and I'll bring up, we had the big opioid settlement in Missouri. A lot of states have, and I know you have been a leader on this for years on the opioid epidemic. Those dollars, we made sure they're not just going to general revenue dollars to be lost. They're going to treatment and to help people who really need it. And so again, those are issues that we can take the lead on as Republicans, and I think show the folks in our states and across the country that we are the right folks to lead us forward.
That's right. And on a very serious note, Sheriff Waybourne, let's talk about Uvalde for a little while. I was Attorney General when Parkland happened. Valentine's Day, on the ground, notifying those families, still talk to them. Liberal, conservative, doesn't matter to this day. Still talk to so many of those families. A lot of mistakes were made there. We know Uvalde, a lot went on there. Can you give us your feelings on hardening these schools and keeping our children safe while they're in school?
Absolutely. And first of all, you know, on behalf of Texas law enforcement, we're very sorry there was an epic failure of law enforcement in Uvalde. That is not the typical response of law enforcement. Is that I believe that we have got to look at hardening schools and take it serious. If I was saying one thing to a principal today, are you ready? Are you ready to go? Are you ready to harden this target to protect our kids and the beat officers that are around that? Because what happens is for those of you who don't know about active shooters, the job of the cop is the first one on scene goes in and goes after the bad guy, and we keep coming in until we neutralize him. And as Sheriff Judd from Florida says, we're going to shoot him and shoot him a lot. But is that I think that we've got to recognize that we've got to do it. We need an immediate response, not a first responder. And what I mean about that is a good guy with a gun inside ready to go. Whether it be a retired police officer or an active duty police officer or a well-trained, vetted staff member in that school. In Texas, many teachers are out qualifying today as we speak, and they're getting ready to go.
And so at America First, we have a school safety issue brief that we've released. You can find it in the back of the room and also on our website. But I don't think we can talk enough about school safety now and protecting our kids.
Yeah, and Pam, in the Trump administration, we issued a school safety commission. President Trump appointed various departments and agencies to come together and come up with best practices to take a sense of what everyone was doing and just then share that information. Congressman, you know, I'm sure you feel it from your constituents, but every time we have an event like Uvalde, sort of the American people rightly say, do something, Congress. And the real question boils down to the media immediately goes to gun control, immediately goes to infringing our Second Amendment rights. In your experience, sort of what can Congress do, but most importantly, what should Congress do in response to these tragedies?
We could do an entire panel on that. And of course, there's a knee-jerk reaction every time there's a tragedy, and our hearts go out. But often the effort is directed in the wrong way and towards the gun instead of the person and the human heart. In the House Judiciary Committee where I serve, Jim Jordan and I were just talking about this in a podcast on Friday about how they always bring these misguided efforts. We have a responsibility to oppose the radical left's legislation because it's not only misguided, in most cases it's also blatantly unconstitutional. Instead of going to the root problem, I think it was Thoreau that said, there are thousands hacking at the branches of evil, the one who is striking at the root. And we need to go to the root causes of this. What I love about AFPI and the America First idea is that we're advancing the foundational principles of our country. The rule of law is one of those, right? Along with individual freedom and limited government and peace through strength and fiscal responsibility and free markets, human dignity, the sanctity of every single human life. I think we need to begin there in addressing the problem, go to the root of it instead of trying to infringe upon the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, which is ultimately where this leads.
Mike, what can Congress do regarding our Second Amendment?
We have a lot of work to do, and when we take back the majority in November, we're going to get right on that, yes. I think my voice went lower instinctively because the offensive line here, I feel like a little bit inadequate. Okay, so...
I was a tight end, by the way.
Okay, all right, sure, yeah. I was the water boy. I'll help you out. So, Pam, there's a lot that Congress should do, that we need to do, and in the majority we're going to. One thing, for example, you talked about the good guys with the guns. Just 2 weeks ago in the Indiana Mall, a good guy with a gun, a good Samaritan, stopped an atrocity there, right? We have to recognize that law-abiding citizens have the right. Thankfully, the Supreme Court has had some good rulings as of late, recognize that you have a right to self-defense, and it's not just in your home, but out in public as well. Congress has a role there. I love the idea of concealed carry reciprocity. You know, think about the logic of this. I mean, Sheriff, thank you, yes. When I drive across state lines to go visit a friend in another state, I don't have to go get a driver's license in that state, right? Why? If you can pass the basic requirements to conceal carry in your state, you ought to be able to do that everywhere. And it just makes sense. That's a fundamental freedom that we have.
Completely agree.
I thought I'd get support from you. And there are lots of things that we're talking about, and this is worthy of discussion, but maybe there should be uniform standards for concealed carry permits, you know, for all the states. There's no reason that a law-abiding citizen in California and New York should not be able to protect themselves and carry their firearm just as all the rest of us.
Well, let me tell you how this is playing out now. So Missouri led the briefing on the New York pistol and rifle case, which was the seminal case that just happened this term, where basically you had the Heller decision 15 years ago that affirmed, yes, this is an individual right. This well-regulated militia stuff that the left talks about, this is Second Amendment protects your God-given right to defend yourself individually. And then what happened, the lower courts start chipping away at that. And so you have the New York pistol and rifle case, because in New York, you have to go to a bureaucrat and prove that you are at risk or that you are in danger. And then that bureaucrat might give you a concealed carry permit. So we challenged that, took it to the Supreme Court, and we won. So that's a big case. But what do you see happening now, though? In Missouri, just last week, the FBI, which has become completely politicized, it's going after parents showing up to school board meetings objecting to masking and CRT. That's what they're doing. And by the way, not arresting people who are trying to intimidate Supreme Court justices. Right. But now they're going and trying to audit local sheriff offices to figure out who has a concealed carry permit in Missouri. And we fired back a letter that day once we became aware of it. You're not doing that in our state. We are going to push back. And Missouri is a constitutional carry state, so we don't, you don't even really need a concealed carry permit. And, the left thought that was going to be the Wild West and the shootout at the OK Corral. That did not happen. People have a right to defend themselves. But to your point, it gives us a great opportunity. Why this organization is so important, it gives us an opportunity to explain to folks what the foundation of this country really was. What the founders said is that everybody had it backwards. You don't need these rights. You don't need permission from a king or a queen. They come from God. And government is just this shared project to protect your God-given rights, certainly not to infringe upon them, and the Second Amendment's a big piece of that.
And your lawsuit, just to add, if you have to ask the state for permission to exercise a right, it's really not a right at all, correct? So, yeah, that was a great piece of litigation.
You know, Matt, let's talk a little bit about these big cities. You're hearing Starbucks now. They're pulling out of some of their biggest liberal cities because even Starbucks, they're scared to have stores open for their employees. And I don't know exactly, it was the big liberal cities we can name, Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, probably in New York. But I've always said bad people are always going to be able to get guns and any type of weapon to hurt us. But it's the law-abiding citizens who have a Second Amendment right to defend ourselves. But what do you think more, gentlemen, I'll pose this question to all of you, about these big cities now, where they're burning, they're crashing, they're falling apart. And I just heard in some town an entire police department, I just heard it on the news, just resigned. Because they don't have the backing, because sheriffs, of course, are independently elected, but most police chiefs report to the mayor. And, you know, if you don't have a mayor to back you up and not to not fund you, and you want to reimagine the police in the middle of the night and send a social worker, we love social workers, but out to a domestic violence call, you know, that's fraught with peril.
I guess I'll just use the St. Louis example. We have a mayor who's a radical leftist, along with that prosecutor I mentioned earlier. The city of St. Louis owes the state of Missouri $5 million for some judgment like a decade ago. I did not make a big deal of this. We sent an email to their office, said, look, keep the $5 million if you use it for more police officers. Okay, you're 200 police officers short. You're trying to defund the police. Here's $5 million to hire more cops to keep people safe. I didn't do a press conference on it. She holds a press conference the next day. Well, the Attorney General is not going to tell me what to do. If he wants to give us the money for vaccine incentives, that's great. But so there is a natural disposition for them to be opposed to these efforts to actually fund police departments. So they talk about that. The city of St. Louis is figuring out a way to find $1 million to transport people outside the state of Missouri to get abortions now, because Missouri has different laws, of course, than the state of Illinois. And so it is it's a pervasive attitude of not supporting the rule of law, to figure out a way to build up their woke bona fides. This is what we're up against. And I think it's really important. I mean, when President Trump was in office, I mentioned our Safer Streets initiative, where we had lawyers designated in the U.S. Attorney's Office. When Operation Legend happened, remember, you had this in 2020, you had, you know, all these, you know, sky-high murders, record-breaking numbers in St. Louis and Kansas City. There was help from the feds wanted to help because of President Trump. And we had the ability to prosecute those additional, you know, crimes that, you know, or bring those additional charges because we had the infrastructure and the bandwidth. So I think this is leadership. It's the cities, they won't prosecute the bad guys. They use the money for these other initiatives. And I think we just have to be strong and just say law and order matters. It's fundamental for people to live their lives and be free.
Is that, and I didn't answer a good question, the rule of law, as you just spoke of, is so incredibly important. And for this thing called the American dream to flourish, we got to have rule of law in place. And the gatekeepers on that are the American law enforcement, period. It starts right there before it ever gets to the court. And what's happening in these woke cities is in some cases there's been some incredible police chiefs there. And being a former chief is that they have got to be willing to be fired to stand on principle and walk away from that job. And until we see more chiefs that have the courage to say, no, not here, not now, and the first rock thrown, we're going after you. And but that's not happening in those cities. So with entire agencies responding is not surprising. Who would want to work there that you're going to, and I've traveled the country and I know boots on the ground, and that's what they're telling me. Says we don't have the backing. And so they're walking away.
Can I just add that ideas have consequences? And I was doing town halls back in Louisiana the last couple of weeks. We were out of session. And anywhere I go, Louisiana is kind of a microcosm, my district is for the rest of the country, and people are so distraught over what they see happening. They're so distraught with the leadership, not only of the big blue cities like we have in New Orleans, but these other cities around the country, and they can't understand why. And you have to break it down to its simplest terms, and it's what the two of you are alluding to, is that there are two different philosophies. We're in a battle of worldviews right now, right? And we are. And the America First agenda believes in the greatness of America because we believe in the foundational principles that we've all been discussing here. We believe that's worthy of defense. We believe we need to pass it along to the next generation. As Reagan said, it's not inherited in the bloodstream. It takes our effort and work in defense. But the other team, the other side, believes they have a very different vision for the country. They have disdain for the founding principles that we all believe in, and they're trying to trade it for something else, a European-style socialist, utopian dream, which is folly, of course. It begins with the premise. You said something a moment ago, General, that's so true. We recognize that the Declaration 246 years ago, we made the bold proclamation that we recognize that our rights don't derive from government. They come from God. Because if the government's the one that can give you your rights, yeah. Obviously, if the government's the one that can give you your rights, the government is also the one that can take them away. So we believe in inalienable rights. And, I just say, we just had our 246th birthday as a nation. We're still an experiment on the world stage. Self-governance is an experiment, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We're only going to preserve it if we keep these principles first and we defend them.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Mike. I want to pick up on, I guess, a theme that's running through this, but as a former prosecutor, I sort of want to hang a lantern on it, and it's something that General Schmidt mentioned is we have, especially in our major cities, as Pam was alluding to too, we have prosecutors who aren't taking cases from the cops. You have 80% of gun crimes in New York City are not being prosecuted. They're being dismissed. So you catch a bad guy with a gun and it's dismissed. And God, heaven forbid, I hope they don't give the guns back, but some of these police departments are messed up in how they respond to these things. But it's these low-level offenders and the lawlessness, which those cases not being taken up by the prosecutors. I'd like each one of your thoughts on your perspective. And Pam, I know you lived this in Florida while you were Attorney General, but what is the importance of doing those lower-level cases, the smash and grab cases, the stealing in broad daylight, those types of cases, and how that by doing those cases makes actually a better environment for law and order and for peace and prosperity in our cities.
If you are working traffic and you give a tolerance of 25 miles an hour over, people will do it. And the broken window theory is alive and well, and it should be enforced. If you're the nickel dime things, if they're not enforced, you're going to get bigger and bigger issues. If code enforcement's not enforced, you're going to get bigger and bigger issues. It is an incredible thing that they let those things go, because all that's going to happen is more trouble is going to come walking in.
It was said one time that what we tolerate in moderation, our children will excuse in excess. You think about the implications of that. And going to the root of this, the root of the cause of this, is that this other side that we're battling against right now in a legislative sense, legal sense, they don't recognize right and wrong. The reason they begin with the incorrect premise, the false premise, is because they've denied the existence of the Creator who tells us what is right and wrong. And so it's all relative. It's all, they believe in the inherent goodness of all people. They don't believe in the fall of man, the fallen, corrupt nature of man. They don't then believe that power can corrupt and absolute power can corrupt absolutely. So the checks and balances and the diffusion of power amongst many, that's not an important principle to them. If you begin with the wrong idea, it leads to dangerous consequences, and that's what we're seeing.
Well, we don't talk about this enough, by the way, this moral relativism that exists, which is a much more kind of philosophical discussion that permeates all sorts of institutions, and certainly the left. But when the rubber really meets the road as a prosecutor, those folks, if they believe there are no consequences to actions that endanger other people, right, that burglary leads to the carjacking. And you see an epidemic of carjacking now. And by the way, just by way of technology, there's more and more carjackings, because in order to steal a vehicle, you almost need someone in the car now. You're not hot wiring a 78 Buick. These are key fobs and people are in the car. It's very dangerous. And so I think that we need to, again, be resolute on that. One of the things that I'm most proud of in my time as Attorney General is we don't normally get cases in the city of St. Louis, but there was a conflict case. Actually, from my predecessor, Josh Hawley, I would never get a conflict case now from the St. Louis prosecutor, but it existed. And early on in my term, I actually wanted to prosecute that case myself. It was a murder in the city of St. Louis for someone who actually had come here legally, was about 2 weeks away from Ethiopia, 2 weeks away from bringing his family to the United States. He was working 2 jobs. Worked at a convenience store. Antonio Muldrew walked into that store, waited for everyone to leave, pulled out a gun, and shot this individual 3 times. Went to the back of the counter. More people came in. Actually made change and did transactions while this individual was on the ground begging for his life. When the rest of the people left, put a bullet in his head and ended his life and the dream of his family. And walking, being 4 feet away from him and making the case in front of that jury, we got the conviction, and stood on, outside after in front of all the cameras, and I wanted the people of St. Louis to know that there was someone who actually cared about crime and violence in the city and was willing to take the time to prosecute someone who had done that. And I think that if we do that more often, if we actually go to places and tell them how important this is, and this is why this forum is so important, what AFPI is doing, the law and order, it is a foundational matter. People deserve to feel safe in their communities, no matter what their zip code is. And they got to know that we care enough that we're going to do the hard work and we're going to call out this nonsense that's happening across the country, because people intuitively know it's wrong. They know it's wrong, and we have to have the courage to say it's wrong and take those actions, like prosecuting the bad guys, clearing this backlog, of sexual assault kits, working on human trafficking, all the things that people can see, and we bring more people to our side that way.
So at AFPI, when the amazing Brooke Rollins called me and asked if I would co-chair with Matt Whitaker the Law and Justice section of AFPI, and with the great work of Linda McMahon and Larry and so many others, and Chad now as our executive director, I don't think we ever dreamed that we'd be having to talk about all of these issues. And that was just a year ago. But I think on a good note, I think when people are driving to get their $5 a gallon gas at the gas station, they want to be safe while they're pumping their gas. And I really think we're seeing a turn in our country for more good. And that's something that Matt and I really want to highlight at our center, at Law and Justice, is all the great work that our great police officers do. And our federal officers, you hear us talk about the FBI, 99% of them are great agents out there working hard every day. And all of our sheriffs and law enforcement who we want to continue to be law enforcement officers, and our great prosecutors out there to support them and be there to have their backs. So you're going to be seeing a lot more positive things coming out, highlighting and focusing on all the great men and women, and it sounds corny, but you thank them. Whenever you see a prosecutor or a military person, of course I'm sure you do, or a police officer, I think it just goes volumes now. If you're thanking them, if you ever notice now how they really react and smile and say thank you for saying that, I think people appreciate it now more than ever in this world.
I agree with you. And we actually in our office started something called the Back the Blue Award. And so we go around Missouri for acts of valor and kindness, big and small. We go around and we reward and recognize those individual officers. And it could be somebody pulling somebody out of a burning vehicle before first responders get there, somebody going above and beyond, and the ultimate sacrifice, obviously, but also the officers who are helping those neighborhood kids with the lemonade stand. And I think that's just so important for us to recognize the work that they do.
We haven't touched on it yet, but one of the responsibilities we have in Congress is oversight in the next Congress as well. And we have to work on, first, depoliticizing the Department of Justice. It's been completely weaponized under this administration. And when we're talking about the foundations and the institutions, the greatest jeopardy of this is that if a free people, if a government of, by, and for the people don't believe that their system of justice is actually blind, there's a reason Lady Justice wears a blindfold, right? Equal justice under law is chiseled into the marble above the Supreme Court building. If people begin to lose their faith in that system, it's very difficult to hold a constitutional republic together, and that's where we are. The faith in our institutions is at historic lows, and it's treacherous for our survival. Ronald Reagan, in his famous farewell address, he said, they call me the great communicator, but I really wasn't. I'm paraphrasing him. He said, I was just communicating great things, and they're the same great things that have guided our nation since its founding. Our challenge, our calling, the work of AFPI and all of us individually is to defend the great things. They don't change. That's what made America the most exceptional nation in the history of the world, and we lose those things at our peril, and I'm so grateful for y'all's work if I don't get another chance to say it.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I agree with what Pam just said. I still believe, as Ronald Reagan said, we're the shining city on the hilltop. We might need to change a few light bulbs. But we still that shining city, and we've still got great optimism, and I believe that law enforcement is going to come back to where it needs to be. I'd love to see on television some more Andy Griffiths and Adam 12s and those type of shows, but I believe the nobility is coming back in the eyes of the people, and we will once again be a place where you can walk the streets with safety and and feel good about it and not worry about it and flourish.
Good. Well, this has been a great discussion. I want to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this. I think actually the rule of law is restoring. I think it's going to take every single one of us working at every place. I think it's going to take everyone in this room. I know that there's a lot of patriots in this room, and I would encourage you to do exactly what Pam said, which is to every time you see a member of law enforcement, thank them for doing their hard work. Tell them that you thank their family for the sacrifices that they make every day to keep us safe as an American people. This is such an important piece of the America First agenda. Making sure that the rule of law is the bedrock principle of our republic, and making sure that we have those that are standing in the gap and defending the rule of law every day. So I want to thank all of you for being here today, but especially I want to thank our panelists, and Pam, thank you for co-chairing this wonderful center with me.
Thank you all. God bless you.